My name is Justin Gage, and you're tuned in to the Aquarium Drunkard Transmissions podcast with your host, Jason Woodbury.
Welcome back to Transmissions. My guest this week on the show is music maker, DJ, and imagination specialist Carlos Niño. His latest album is called More Energy Fields Current, and it's out on the great International Anthem label, one of my favorite labels going. Carlos joined me for a talk about his process, working with people like Iasos and Laraaji, and how hip-hop and sample culture informs his spiritual, improvisational space collage style. We also got into his long history in radio. He was one of the founders of Dublab, where my show on Radio Free Aquarium Drunkard airs every third Sunday of the month. Before we head into the talk, I want to take a minute to mention how great it's felt seeing so much live music announced for later in the year. One name I've noticed on a lot of lineups is Black Pumas, psychedelic soul band from Austin, Texas. Their self-titled debut was nominated for 4 Grammys, including Album of the Year, and after a long time off the road, they're getting back out there with shows scheduled for the US and EU in places like Seattle, San Francisco, and Chicago, and at Lollapalooza, Austin City Limits, Ohana, and Summerfest. Should I fly out to Summerfest this year? My father-in-law's out in Milwaukee. He'd probably be down to hang out. Anyway, a lot of these shows are already sold out, but don't miss the chance to see them live and grab a copy of their self-titled album wherever you get your music. Carlos Niño. This talk flipped my lid. I hope you enjoy it. If you do, please go on and rate and review Transmissions wherever you listen to podcasts. We appreciate your word of mouth very much, and we hope that it helps people find the show. If you want to dig in even more, you can check out Aquarium Drunkard on Patreon. All right, here's my talk with Carlos. Speak more on the other side. Thanks for tuning in. Carlos, thanks so much for taking the time to join us here on the Aquarium Drunkard Transmissions podcast. It's great to have you here.
Oh, wonderful to be here. Big fan of Aquarium Drunkard. Yeah, thank you.
Well, the feeling is very mutual. Your records are great, and this new one, More Energy Fields Current, is extremely good. I wanted to start off by asking a few questions about that, if that sounds good.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, so it features a lot of collaborations. Everything you do with the and friends banner is usually a loaded guest list, of course, and collaborator list. So you've got all sorts of folks, Sam Gendel and Jamal Dean and Laraaji and Shabaka Hutchins from Sons of Kemet. The Comet is coming, man. That new Sons of Kemet record is so good. Anyway,
I agree.
But I'm interested that this pulls from jam sessions that you recorded a few years ago. Is that correct?
Up until recently. I mean, I finished the record, I think, in August of 2020, but I was hosting sessions here in my studio all of last year. I think some things are sourced from a few years ago, the oldest being the piece with Laraaji. I'm still kind of finding things in the recordings that we did when we toured as a duet in 2017. And, Yeah, I kind of don't really let anything go to waste or to get lost. Like I just archive things and I tune into them whenever I want to. But a lot of this record actually is 2020 and made very freshly, in the moment. I worked on another record at the same time called Actual Presence that I self-released last year, I believe last July. And a lot of these songs were made at the same time and just kind of, set up for release with International Anthem and, sequenced in a way. But yeah, the source is multiple times and not just what I would refer to as jam sessions, but really I come from a tradition of what would be referred to as spontaneous composition. So there's really a sense in everything that we're doing of being fully in the moment, totally expressive, and then realizing that we're going to have some real things to share, some things to look back at and kind of say like, hey, we want to create from this, or just real something really meaningful and authentic. So yeah, that's
the thing that's so interesting to me about that is obviously you're getting all these people together in a room and you are, as you said, the idea is spontaneous composition. Like we're going to make something and we're going to listen to each other and we're going to fashion this into something in the moment. Is that a fair way to put it?
Yeah.
What do you do to sort of cultivate the kind of vibe and space that allows that sort of thing to happen? Because I have to imagine that it requires some advanced preparation, you know what I mean, in terms of sort of the vibe and the feel of what you're doing, or is it the people that mostly influence how that works? How does that come together?
It's all of that. You said advanced preparation. I would say the advanced preparation is our whole lives. Like it's literally everything that we live, tuning into the moment that we get together, and the we is very important, and that really is a friend group. I don't just have that name in the title of the band, for no reason. These are actually people that I talk with and counsel with and go swimming in the ocean with and travel with and make meals with and do anything that we feel like doing together. This is like a real mutuality, with a few exceptions of people that I would say I don't know as well or see as often. People that you mentioned like Sam Gendel and Jamel Dean and Laraaji and Iasos. These are all very close personal friends. And that's kind of the point, is like it really is like a life. Sometimes I reach out to people that I've never met before, never spoken to before, because I have an intuition that we could make something. Sometimes people reach out to me in the same way. And what I would say is that like friendships really do arise from that. Not always, but often. And I just value that the most. Yeah, I would never really call someone or hire someone to do something specific without having like a real personal connection with them. So I feel like that's kind of what it's all about in collaboration, is really like how much do we connect. And then when you have that, when you get in a room, it just goes. It's already alive. There's very little to talk about unless there's something really specific that I want to try or that somebody else wants to try, and that happens occasionally. But it's really just about like, let's do what we do, and it's collective communication. There's a real balanced exchange that's happening, and there's also an experimentation. But all together, I would say it's like a gathering of expression and care and checking in, tuning in, feeling. So yeah, the preparation to me is ongoing. It's really like our whole lives. I think a lot of improvisers feel that way. They feel like I'm going to listen deeply. I'm going to communicate deeply. I'm going to really care about this moment and what is possible creatively.
Right. When you like, let's say, finish a session, a spontaneous composition session, and you mentioned that you archive most of the stuff that you record and that you do keep track of it. Well, I guess off the top of my head, how organized is your archive of recordings?
I'd say it's really organized.
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't do this for years. I'd say only like in the last like 5 years have I been doing this, and so there's years and years and years and years of recordings that I never even made or kept track of, and I do sometimes wish I was a better archivist and librarian, especially in that part of my life, because there'd be so much to tap into. And I hear about legends like Brian Eno and Ryuichi Sakamoto and other people that we all love who have extensive archives, and they even have assistants who are frequently keeping track of their like what's on the hard drives, where things are, making sure things are labeled properly, dating things properly. I mean, I value that very highly. As a collector, as a record collector, as an instrument collector, those are things that are meaningful to me as well. And so I keep my archive really together. A lot of my friends do as well. Like we mentioned Sam Gendel, that beautiful album that I was honored to be a part of, that he put out last year called Fresh Bread, that Leaving Records then also made a deluxe official release of this year.
Yeah,
that's archive, and some of that
Right.
might be like, I made that today and released it today via my Bandcamp page next to a piece that was made a year ago or 10 years ago, and it all, if he feels it, can sequence it in a way that it tells the story that he wants to tell. And the pieces that I'm on that record were largely from a duet tour that we did in Japan, and I've used some of those recordings and he's used some of those recordings, and it's really wonderful because it just sort of becomes like a very open field of sound source, like what you might want to sample from your own session, or what you might want to excerpt a through like total piece from a live performance. And by live performance, I don't just mean live in a venue or in front of an audience, like live in the sense that it's being created in the moment wherever we are. We could be in a studio. Yeah.
No, absolutely. What are some of the things that you listen for in sessions? What kind of piques your ear? Are there sort of things that you find yourself drawn to repeatedly? Moments?
Oh, yeah.
Or is it sort of a case by case, moment by moment thing for you?
It's both. There are things I'm listening for, and it's always a feeling. It's really. I grew up like a very devoted hip hop head, and so the idea of a sample, or the idea of a moment in a record, or the idea of something that I would want to loop and or edit is huge for me. And in creating what it would essentially be the sample sources with my friends, I am omnipresently or simultaneously listening while I'm totally present in the moment. And there are things that I don't hear when they're happening that I discover later, but frequently I would say that I'm doing some version of supercomputing where I'm like completely free in the moment. Yeah. And I'm also bookmarking sections that I know I want to get back to, and like very eagerly, like sometimes even race to go back and listen to again if it's been an hour, and I'm like, oh, there's this one thing that was so special. And I mean, even sometimes, to be honest, if something is so special in a moment, I might even stop before we get too far along and continue developing that idea that came up in the session and and listen back to it, or say, hey, let's not move away from this too quickly. Let's keep going in this space. So, it's really an all of the above, a both and, like kind of like a very yes energy, like of anything goes. But those are some examples.
Yeah. I'm glad, obviously, that you brought up the hip hop ethos and how much that has deeply influenced what you do. I think that it's been, as a listener, just very, very interesting and exciting to hear hip-hop production techniques and the sort of ideology of sampling applied through artists like yourself and collaborators of yours, people like Kamasi Washington and Madlib and so many others, but sort of applied to new age or free jazz or spiritual jazz, or all that stuff. It's just such a, to me, it all feels very of a piece in terms of the approach. The sort of hip hop, while it can be certainly very economical and sort of tightly edited, that the approach lends itself so well to expression in these other genres. I just think it's such an interesting moment that we're living through right now, where people like yourself are building and expanding and taking apart some of the notions of genre, which is, I guess, why I like that you call your style sort of spiritual improvisational space collage. Is that did I get that right?
Yeah, absolutely, and I agree with everything that you're saying, and I love all of those artists. Those are all friends of mine. Those are all people that I appreciate greatly. And one thing I'll just add, and I know Aquarium Drunkard is known for this, not only in the podcasts and radio shows and in all of the features, but if we really look at the pioneers of hip hop sampling and of sampling in general, because sampling goes way back. And there are lots of examples of sampling, but it was really about sound, So yes, we know James Brown and George Clinton and some of the luminaries of certain. I don't want to just say and pigeonhole them to styles of music, but there are certain things that people gravitate toward the most, and it makes sense, and it's amazing, and you can say in a way that that's sort of the predecessor of the style that it's being recreated into, be it hip hop or house or any other kind of style that's using a lot of samples. But I mean, the amount that you find digging through the samples by artists like the ones you've mentioned, or like I love to reference DJ Premier, but there's so many wonderful ones. Q-Tip is like a goat to me for sure. Prince Paul, Dilla, of course, Madlib you mentioned, and even in like the very contemporary times, I'm a huge Knowledge fan, and there's so many others as well. But they're sampling anything that they want, and they're listening to everything. Like there's nothing that any of these people that I just mentioned are not listening to. They're listening to everything. They're inspired by everything. They're open-minded to everything. Like a real hip-hop producer's collection isn't necessarily as broad as everyone else's, but like the ones who are deep with it, there's nothing that they wouldn't consider or listen to or be open to as a possible sound or sample source. And I'm just part of that lineage. That I don't make the same music per se, but I feel the same way. And so what I make is definitely in some cases, not all, but in some cases referencing or an ode to that, and I like that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, so I'm curious how radio plays into how your approach has been shaped, because that's sort of more or less how you got your start, right? At KPFK with a show. I believe your show is called All at One Point, which you started in the mid 90s. Is that correct?
Yep, 1995. That title comes from a really beautiful story that I was inspired by the Italian writer Italo Calvino. I believe he's actually from South America, but anyway, Italo Calvino's Cosmic Comics had a story in there called All at One Point, still does. That was the first radio show that I did at KPFK starting in 1995, and that grew into Spaceways Radio, which I did until 2015. Along the way as well, I was co-founder of Dublab in 1999. And I would say that radio is like central to my whole point of view in regard to making records, in regard to making songs. I'm hugely into the format and medium of radio, and also because it's so immediate. I love that, like, however somebody on the radio is feeling, they do have the opportunity to express that in that moment and connect with anybody that might be listening. And there's something very like transitory about it. And then when it's archived or recorded, there's something, that kind of takes on another life. Like it almost can become many other things, infinitely other things. I think that programming and sequencing for radio and considering the flow for radio, because I was never a mix DJ. I was always a selector and always sort of like a curator or programmer. I have friends who I consider to be real DJs, like Cut Chemist and J Rock and others who are really artists on multiple levels. But as DJs, I'm not quick to be like, oh, I'm a DJ. I'm kind of more like, no, but I'm deep into music and I'll play it, and I'll share it and I'll spin it. And I am definitely coming from like a radio point of view when it comes to how I present music and how I present my own music. So I think a lot of my records play like a radio show, and that is totally intentional. It's totally my vibe. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, so did you grow up making mixtapes and stuff? Did you grow up obsessed with the radio?
Yes, I did. I did grow up obsessed with the radio. I was making pause tapes on a little cassette deck from the radio when I was a kid. And I wouldn't say I made a lot of mixtapes because, again, I wasn't really so much like a mix. Like I've made a few. When I first learned Pro Tools in 2003, I was taught Pro Tools by Daedalus, who I'd been working with for a couple of years on his records. And at that point, all the music that I had been made in other people's studios. I'd never had a personal computer. I'd never learned anything. I had instruments in my house and would make music, but then I would go to a friend's studio or rent a studio and mix in a studio.
Right.
And then when I started doing things at home, from the very kind lessons that I got from Daedalus, I did make a couple of mixes that were very meaningful to me. And they were totally in reference to hip-hop mixes that were made on 4 tracks by some of my favorite DJs from the early, mid, all through the 90s. Like the mixtape culture when I was growing up was so awesome. And I'm a huge fan of, say, like the Bomb Squad as well and all of their productions. So I made this one called Spaceways Radio Collage. And that's really like an effort to sort of say like, hey, here's my homage to the mixtapes that I grew up with, but I wouldn't say I mixed it like a DJ would. I mixed it like emulating that, but in Pro Tools, So yeah. I'm interested in the idea of the collage aspect of what you do, because it seems like that's a very, I guess maybe that is sort of that hip hop thing coming into shape in a way, right? Because when you talk about classic hip-hop techniques, you are talking about juxtaposition sometimes, and you're talking about contrast and being able to make things that don't necessarily sound like they go together cohesive and come together in a way. And I feel like as a radio programmer, I mean, that's sort of like
that's just, it seems like you've almost, and maybe unintentionally, but trained your mind to hear things a little bit that way. Is what I pick up on. When did you start collecting records?
Well, I agree with what you just said, and I feel like the big difference and differentiation for me in referring to the music that I make the way that I do is that for me it's all about feeling. It's not about technical, musical, trained aspects, which I also greatly appreciate, and I work with musicians who are as advanced as exist, and I appreciate all of the aspects. But for me to not misrepresent myself, I had to really think about what I was doing, what it meant to me, and how I could communicate that. And so that's why I've kind of referred to it the way that I have. And the collage aspect definitely has to do with what you're talking about. It has so much to do with the feeling of how things go together, not necessarily like, are they actually fitting? Sometimes you pull something in such a way and it fits in a way that like has changed your mind altogether about what was possible. Same thing with notes. I mean, not everything is right or wrong. Sometimes things just feel a way, and that just becomes what you're sharing, and that goes for all kinds of things, not just music. But I started collecting records when really I started collecting tapes, and I collected them intensely, trying to impress an older cousin of mine, my cousin Ernesto, who was the first person to turn me on to, I think all on the same day, he turned me on to Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Sonny Rollins, and Weather Report, all in the same day. And I was probably in 5th grade. I was already like deeply into music. I was listening a lot to, say, like Prince and Michael Jackson and Run DMC and the Fat Boys, and maybe early Public Enemy and early Boogie Down Productions. And that was like that was my stuff. Aside from like what other pop music of the day, like lots of things come to my mind when I think about that. But I was buying cassettes, and actually I used to wear these Bugle Boy jeans, and I used to steal cassettes. Like I was like kind of a fiend for them. So I didn't really have money, but I would get them however I could, and they were cheap. And I never got caught, but I did eventually like sort of catch myself and say, oh, this is not in integrity for me to like steal. But I was so motivated, man. I was just so motivated to like have this rad tape collection, so that when this person that I looked up to so much came over to my house, I would immediately be like, yo, look, check out these cassettes that I have. And like, maybe we'd listen to some of them in the car. And yeah, I probably started really buying records. The first record I know I bought myself was the Jungle Brothers 12-inch What You Waitin' For, and I bought it from Tempo Records on Ventura Boulevard in Reseda, and I was probably in 6th grade. And I was a huge, and still am in whatever way I can be, a huge fan of Native Tongues, Jungle Brothers, De La Soul, Tribe Called Quest, Black Sheep, Queen Latifah, Moni Love, all of them. Love them all so much. Yeah.
You brought up, that you were picking up this stuff. You've lived, kind of born and raised in Los Angeles, right?
Yeah, I was born in Santa Monica and lived there as a baby, I think. And then our family moved to Reseda, and I grew up in Reseda. And I've lived in the city, but I live currently in my studio is currently in Woodland Hills. So I really have had like an all city experience, because I drive all the time and do a lot of different things in different parts of LA. But I'm really like more of a San Fernando Valley resident and person, Yeah.
Sure. It's just kind of got me thinking, I'm not in LA, and I always try to be a little bit careful, when I start talking about California, because I don't know it like the back of my hand. I'm in Arizona, so there's like but it does feel a little bit like a a cousin or whatever. California, the place does. But I think about the tradition in LA of the studio musicians there, and I wonder if you agree or think that the necessity that some of these people had, session players, to play on whatever kind of music was gonna pay the bills. I wonder if you get a sense that contributes to the overall blurring of genre that happens in LA, and that obviously you're associated with the kind of people that we're talking about. This sort of like truly fusion based thing that's happening. I wonder if you could speak to maybe sort of a little bit of the historical roots of that, or if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, the first thing that I would say is that I just really wish we as a society, as a people, looked out for our artists much more.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of a dear friend and collaborator and elder and mentor named Phil Ranelin, who I work closely with. And Phil moved from Detroit, where he was based, had his own record label with Wendell Harrison called Tribe Records, and had moved to Detroit from Indianapolis, where he's originally from, because he was working with Motown and playing in sessions all the time for Motown. And when Motown moved to Los Angeles, he moved a couple of years later as well and settled here. And I'm saying that to say that, like, I feel like a lot of decisions that are made for working musicians are based on where the work is and what they can do to survive. And I don't feel like they should be in that kind of survival mode. I feel like there needs to be way more emphasis put on the development of the arts in this country, and probably in the whole world, but I will just speak on this country. And I think that there's always an interest and an outlet for a creative musician. So if you're a creative musician and you're working to pay the bills, you're still going to create what you're hearing and you're feeling if you don't have a job that is actually just doing that. So like say anybody that was playing in Miles Davis's group, I mean, they didn't have to do something on the side necessarily, but that's like very few people. And those are all, among the greatest musicians of all time, like Keith Jarrett and Joe Zawinul and Herbie Hancock and Tony Williams, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, so many, Jack DeJohnette, so many masters. And everyone else is kind of trying to figure out what to do and how to get by. And I would just say that a lot of the music that's made while people are really tuning into like their feelings, their source, their experience, wanting to report from that, whether they're working musicians or not, or whether they have like a day job and just say like, you know what, I don't want to have the music I make be my bread and butter because I want that to be just a total creative space. I know people who are like that as well, who say, I would rather work a mundane day job or some sort of job that pays well, and then I'm going to like focus on my music separate of that. Then there are, people like myself, and you mentioned Madlib. He's probably the person that most directly influenced me to stop working and focus completely on my music as my life. I had a few other contemporaries at the time. Daedalus is one of them as well that I feel that way about. And I've always been a concert programmer and producer to help supplement my creative music income. But yeah, I feel like this is a complicated and complex question because everybody's unique and kind of having their own experience of it. But I just feel overall that like the hustle, the really intense like effort that people make just to get by and survive is sad to me. I don't feel like it should be set up that way. I feel like we should all be contributing to funds. I for instance, I would if it was up to me, have money from our taxes going into funds that help support artists of all kinds. And I know we're spending trillions of dollars in military spending, and I have zero interest in that. I don't really want to get into like a heavy thing about that right now, because that would be a whole other conversation. But I feel like there's a massive misguidance and mismanagement of where our collective money goes. And yes, I'm biased and partial, but I think that there should at least be some real funds on a basic level for every artist that lives in this country, and not just artists, but
Yeah, if you think about it, the last year, 2020, and then into this year, one, everybody I know misses seeing music and experiencing it on a physical level, but two, everybody I know also turned to music so much in order to process the insane trauma and intensity and sadness of what was happening, So I think you're right when you say basically that this, art is essential to our humanity, and music
I would add that it's perspective also, because, for instance, the things that were going on and still are going on, and that really always go on in this, in this time, there are a lot of like really horrific, awful things that humans are perpetrating against each other and this planet every day. And there are a lot of things that we hear about, and there are a lot of things we don't hear about, and they're happening all the time. And I feel like removing actual connection within humanity, within community, removing people's ability to connect with live music. These are things that more than anything to me are making it more difficult for people to actually have perspective about what they think is actually going on and how they feel about it. So like I don't want to presume that I know how somebody feels about what we've all been going through, because it's not all the same. It really isn't. There are very, very different experiences that people have been having and will have all the time. But the one thing that I feel like is essential about what we're doing with music is we're giving people this openness, this consideration for expanded perspective, expanded awareness, like expanded consideration of their feelings. Like, how do you feel about this information you're getting from the news, or you're getting from your peer group, or you're just sensing, or that you read about somewhere, or that maybe you get a phone call from a friend and they happen to be living in another part of the world and they're telling you about their experience that day. And there's so many things that are going to be brought up for us to then process. And I feel like music is one of these things that is going to continue to allow us to open our perspective field, to give us the ability to even have a consideration for other possibilities or other ways of interpreting or feeling what we think is going on, So I'm all for that, not only staying present, but being even more encouraged in people's lives. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if, at the risk of putting you in a position to be on a bully pulpit or whatever, do you feel like the average listener has a healthy sort of relationship to what music can provide in terms of the sort of context giving and expansion of the sort of emotional or spiritual vocabulary in the ways that you're talking about? Do you feel like, I guess what I'm getting at there is I don't feel like most of the way that music is presented to people really encourages the kind of deep listening and the deep engagement that you're talking about, because it's almost just thought of as another thing that is meant to be consumed. Well, without getting too, I don't want to be too,
oh no,
what I mean.
We can talk about anything. Yeah. And I appreciate it. I think that what you just said goes for all aspects of life. The average person is consuming what is put in front of them, and we're doing this we're having this conversation as part of a series on Aquarium Drunkard, where people go to read about and listen to lots of really wonderful music and art, and that is rarer. It is more of a specific thing. It's not a mainstream thing, and I feel that people in whatever lifestyle they have, whatever emotional state of being that they're in, they're going to gravitate toward something that they feel resonant with. And the issue I have that I would say is that if people in general are being force-fed certain information, and by force-fed I mean they could not have it unless they didn't have a phone or didn't have a TV or didn't live around other people. The force-feeding of certain media, including the music, is to me like very like imprisoning. It's not something that really speaks to emotion. It's not something that speaks to like critical thinking. It's not something that speaks to like what a person's experience is with it. But I still feel like it can be beneficial, and I think that wherever and however somebody is coming to something, if they feel it and it makes them, you know, like I was saying before, consider some aspect of their life in an elevated way because of the way that they're feeling about something that they are listening to, then I'm glad for that. And I think that there are messengers on every level, on like every vibratory level and every stage of, and I'm not here to judge the levels for anybody. I'm just saying, like, I feel like in every level there's going to be some sort of message and messengers coming through the music. You know, in music that I do not want to listen to, that I would feel totally repulsed by, that somebody else loves, there's something coming through that could help break that particular person out of some sort of blockage or stress or difficulty that they're in, and I'm all for that. So I just kind of feel like we're gravitating toward what we resonate with. We resonate with things based on our emotional state of being and our spiritual consciousness, no matter what level that's on. And I just wish for people the connection to it, to what they feel, to what they care about. And your question was about whether they actually do feel or do care, and I think that they do. But it's different maybe than how we all think about the things that we're so passionate about that a blog like this would represent, because we're like deeply in it. I mean, this is like what we do, you know, like the people who read this blog, yourself, people who write for the blog. It's like our lives. That's
it
really,
is. It's
really
a way of life.
For the average person, you know?
Yeah. Well, I want to ask about a few of your collaborators and a few that you've already mentioned, and I think that in terms of that notion that there are kind of messages coming through the music, I'd love to hear how you first met Iasos.
I just reached out to him. He made himself very available at a certain time. I reached out to him in January of 2010, probably like January 2nd, and his birthday was a few days later, and we hit it off immediately. This was January 2nd, 2010, yeah. And I just went up to see him immediately, and we've been very, very close ever since. And I think that his openness to me when I called him is why we met. My interest in meeting him was just total. I was just really feeling like it was time. I was only ever familiar with interdimensional music through Iasos until I was at a friend's house and they were playing Javanese dream bells, and I was just like, what is this? There was something in the spiritual information of that piece that made me so compelled to reach out to Iasos, like I had just been given a key to unlock a door within myself to an agreement to know someone in this lifetime. And it really was like that. I mean, we've been very, very close friends and collaborators the entire time. And by collaborator, I mean primarily that I've been sort of like a business manager advisor for him, and he's been like a mentor to me. I do not make Iasos music. Iasos occasionally will guest, kind of appear on some of my music, but not because that's the kind of music he makes. It's really more because of how close we are, that he's open to that. That was something I've never had any trouble with, just reaching out to someone. I've worked with a lot of elders in my life, and I've worked with a lot of people in my life, and most of the relationships were as simple as me saying, like, I'd like to do this with you. Be it Gil Scott-Heron and Brian Jackson, bringing them to Los Angeles in, I don't know, I think like 1997 or something like that, for a concert. And it was the first time they were going to play together in, I don't know, maybe 15 years or something like that. And I had interviewed Gil Scott-Heron for an article that I wrote about him for Herb magazine, and he was a guest on my radio show. And all of that was initiated by just loving his music, figuring out how to reach him, calling him, cold calling him, and just pitching it all. Like just being like, hey, you want to do this?
Yeah.
Somebody can say no or not answer, and then other times they'll answer. And then all of a sudden you're like hanging out with Pharoah Sanders, and you're hanging out with, whoever. Like I've worked with many incredible artists who I look up to hugely. And a lot of it is just from that. It's from this thing that I have, which is I have no problem just reaching out and just being honest and real. And what I've been able to offer people has grown. It's changed. So when I was a little kid doing this, when I was just 18 years old, starting out with these kinds of cold calls, usually what I was offering was like promotion on my radio show, or I'll write this article, and like I'm gonna really get your story told properly, or maybe you can come play a live concert. I don't know. So I feel like my relationships with musicians that I work with really sometimes start that way as well. And people have to be open to me too, which is kind of the point, and I don't take that for granted at all. You mentioned Shabaka Hutchings. Shabaka and I don't know each other that well, but just have like a really strong rapport, and we were familiar with each other, and we played together a couple of times in Micaiah McCraven's group, and then I played with Sons of Kemet once when they played like a last minute show in a little music venue that I run in Venice Beach, under the townhouse. And that just led to us looking at each other kind of going like, yeah, we should just get in the studio and play some duets. And we did that, and that's how the duet record that I made with Sam Gendel came about. I'd known Sam for a while, but we'd never played together, and we were kind of exchanging some messages back and forth around the time that one of my records had come out and one of his records had come out, and we both sent each other almost simultaneously like a message of like, hey, I'm feeling your new record. And then it was just sort of like, why don't we get in the studio and see what happens when we create? And we just do, So a lot of this to me is very organic. It's very much a part of life. It's just sort of a part of the openness. There's almost no formality in it. And a lot of it just has to do with like open communication and mutual interest and mutual benefit, and then getting to it, And I love it. I love living that way, and I recommend it.
Yeah. You've mentioned a few times like working with people in duet settings. What do you like about that format, or what does the duet format sort of allow you to maybe do that? Obviously, you work in much larger ensembles as well, But I'm curious about specifically the duet format. What you enjoy about working in that fashion?
Well, like what we're doing right now, you and me, we just met, is a duet. So I'm trusting that you're going to have good energy when you call me to interview me. And I'm trusting that you're going to care about yourself and about me and about this process. And in doing that, I'm going to respond and engage with you, and I've agreed to, so I'm coming with my own energy for it as well. And in this process, we're just free to have an exchange. like exactly what we're doing right now. So if you apply that to a duet musically, it's the same thing. Instead of having multiple people whose energy, feelings, ideas, expression needs to be considered and opened up to, it's really just more of like two people sharing with each other. And when you open it up, in the case of us having a conversation, you would need more space. You would talk less, I would talk less, because other people need to be considered. Also, you could imagine that instead of it being like what I see is like a beam between you and me, you in Arizona, me here in my studio. Imagine it now as like a hologram. So there's going to be like a variety of angles and light beams that are happening as the ensemble gets larger. So you're creating dimensionality in it as well. It's less like literally like one-on-one. It's much more like, oh, now we're dealing with other aspects of space. You do that as a duet in music as well, but there still is the sense that like you're really listening to and connecting with one other being and making eye contact in some cases, listening for everything that you can, hear and feel and just be a part of, So yeah, I feel like it's a dance. It's a conversation. A lot of it is psychic in music. A lot of it is just you set an intention, and you're always working on being able to show up with your most full, most open self. And when you do that, I mean, it just happens, it is happening. It's like it already happened and continues to happen. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, when you work with someone like Iasos, I love that one of the songs on the new record is Iasos 79 till infinity. So you get like a Souls of Mischief reference in there. And then is that referencing that documentary
Exactly.
that you can watch on YouTube or whatever? Is that correct?
Exactly. Yeah. That was the last piece I made for the record. It was made to be a bridge between what was originally the end of the record, which was track 8, Togetherness, with Devin Daniels and Jamel Dean. But because we decided to put this bookend of an extended version of the first piece with Shabaka and Jamel, I wanted to create a bridge, and Iasos wasn't on this album, and he's among my closest people that I've ever known, and we're just so close that I was like, oh, this piece that I'm working on is this bridge, felt to me like Iasos music. It was something I was creating with the keyboard, and then I asked him if I could sample and kind of process some of his voice from the documentary, and he said yes. And then that's when it just sort of like the reference to the 79, when I was thinking like, oh, if I put the word 79, like it's got to be till infinity, because 79 doesn't really matter. But because I put the 79, you know exactly what I'm referencing because you're familiar with that documentary. So it's kind of like that, Yeah. And this reminds me actually of the year 93, which was really interesting because you have 93 till infinity, and then on the same label you have Midnight Marauders by A Tribe Called Quest, and there's a point where Q-Tip is correcting himself on the track, and he said because he says 9 Trey, like 93, and he says Large Professor, or I guess he called him Eric DeP, said don't say the years, so this is for eternity, right? So he's basically saying like, we're always referencing the year and marking the year, but what if it's not even about that, right? What if it's just about the beyond? So I was playing in that title with that whole concept, right? So yeah, that's what I was doing, and I don't think it means that much, but I'm glad you got it, yeah.
Well, I think it's very playful, it's fun, and that means something, especially because that's another thing about your music that I think is really interesting and that I really appreciate, is the sort of palpable sense of playfulness and joy that's in it. So often, especially music that can veer towards the contemplative can be thought of as more solemn. But then when you bring people like Iasos or Laraaji into the mix, obviously there's just such an emphasis on laughter and spontaneity and playfulness. So I love that about your records, and I love that there's a sense of both that deep intentionality that you're talking about, but also sort of a sense of lightness to things too, because you're capturing and presenting specific moments, and you are editing them into shapes, but there's always still a trace of just that sort of, this just happened while we were together. And, to me that makes it, it demonstrates the importance of the music in a fundamental way by just allowing that importance to exist. But it's also, you're not presenting it in a way that the listener has to bring a whole bunch to the table. They're just sort of able to experience it. And I don't know, I think that sense of playfulness really pervades what you do, and even that sense of playfulness that I pick up in just our conversation. So I think that feels like it's a very important thing. And it's not always to feel playful, and not always easy to feel playful in like modern times,
Yeah.
Plenty of reasons to be bummed out instead,
I'm so glad you feel that in the music. It is definitely there. You're getting it completely. I agree. It's very meaningful to me, no matter what emotion is being expressed, that I'm like kind of like persevering through to the bright side. It's just my orientation. It's just how I live, And speaking to playfulness, Laraaji has a thing he loves to say. He says, "Playing is serious business," because he's all about play. he's all about play, and sometimes when people talk about like, "Hey, let's get together and play," I feel like there are like octaves or dimensions. Iasos is calling me right now, by the way. That's so cool. His name just came up on the phone. But there are octaves and dimensions to even the word, like what we mean about that word when we say play. It is that total youthful, like in the moment, like fully spirited, fully ecstatic energy. And it is like, we're seriously going to get together and tune in and play in this, from the wholeness of who and what we are. And those are not exclusive of each other. Those to me are the same thing, but in like somewhat different octaves, and they go together, and there's lots of other ways that people could express themselves about what playing is or what playing feels like to them. Like I collaborate frequently with DeAntony Parks, and for him, I feel like there would be an aspect of like real consideration for the technology of his earth body and how it's connecting to his mind, being programmed and interpreted by his soul. And then there's a level of like athleticism and even like working out and like real like sweat exercise in what we're doing too. So it really is, this is a totally multifaceted reality. It's like if you say, "Hey, I'm going to go play basketball," you might not have the same fun you're going to have if you say, "Oh, I'm going to go, jump in a pool and splash around with my friends." But the playing on the level that it is does fulfill these things, and there are there are like octaves to it, which I appreciate.
I think that there's so many directions that I could take all of that, but I think it's just such an interesting and exciting thing that you're talking about happening when you're in collaboration with people, and you talked about being in duo settings and sort of tuning into the other person and having there be an exchange. And something that I think about when I think about people like Iasos and Laraaji to some degree, is the sense that for both of those people, they're talking very often about how they're picking up on vibrations and energies from outside of themselves. So I wonder how often it feels like that's happening in the room for you as well. And if that's the sort of thing that the longer you've been involved in making creative music and exchanging energies in that way, if it's something that you feel like you feel more now than you did when you started.
Yeah, it's always evolving. A few concepts come to mind. One is everything is everything. Another one is eternal now. Another one is everything, anything, nothing. For me, this is an all of the above. Like I don't channel music in cooperation with a higher dimensional being the way that Iasos does. Laraaji is primarily a solo artist, but collaborates with various people from time to time. And his thing is really about tuning into the core vibrations of the universe and having that, come through him. And neither of them, in my opinion, are people who would say that they are not also involved. They're totally involved. They've worked hard to be able to communicate the things that are coming through them, or the things that they are receiving in the way of messages or communication or guidance from, be it the galactic center of our omniverse, or in Iasos's case, Vista. So yeah, there's a lot going on. I would just say it's all happening. Everything is everything. Eternal now. Really, these concepts which are present in so much of the music that we love, they really are the thing. John Coltrane referred to it as a love supreme. He was like, I'm reaching toward God consciousness. It wasn't something that was separate of him, but it was something that he also felt was beyond, and that he could pay tribute to, that he could inspire people to be aware of in what he was doing when they would listen to him. And I feel all of that, all of those things, all of those different versions or ways of communicating that are all things that I feel present and totally enlivened and uplifted and enriched by, energized by. It's kind of the thing. That's what it is. That's what we're dealing with.
Yeah. Well, I don't think I could add anything to that except to thank you so much for taking your time to discuss all this with me and unpack all of it and wander into these zones that I don't know. I found it very, very uplifting as well, and appreciate you taking the time to speak with me about this great music that you've made.
Oh, thank you so much too. I want to add one thing, which is just acknowledgement of the musicians I didn't mention. Nate Mercereau.
Oh, sure.
Nate Mercereau and I have been making so much music, and I'm so grateful that it's coming out in various ways on these records, and he's made huge contributions to More Energy Field's current. Randy Gloss, who I know from Adam Rudolph, two of my big bros in this music. I want to acknowledge Dexter Story and Miguel Atwood Ferguson. Neither of them are on this particular record, but they're just very, very close, dear collaborators of mine and very close friends. Shar Shadar, I had to give her love always for her openness and willingness to contribute to music that I send her. Dintel, Jimmy Tamborello, one of my dublab peers whose music and productions I love so much. Jesse Peterson. Yeah, I'll just do a little roll call here because it's a big deal. Yeah, Aaron Shaw and the group Black Nile. Thank you so much. This was lovely. I greatly appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to hearing it on the site. Yeah.
Thanks for listening. I'm Jason Woodbury. I write, host, and produce Transmissions. Andrew Horton edits our audio. Visual designs by Sarah Goldstein, and the visualizer version of our show is built by Jonathan Mark Walls. Our executive producer and top of the show announcer is Aquarium Drunkard founder Justin Gage. We'll be back next Wednesday, joined by a guest I'm very excited about, Tom Sharpling of The Best Show. He's written a great new book called It Never Ends, and you can get your copy now by heading over to tomwroteabook.com. And you should do it. It's beautiful, funny, honest, engrossing, and I really, really enjoyed getting a chance to speak with him about it. Stay safe until then. You can hit up the Patreon for more. And of course, tune into Justin Gage's long-running Aquarium Drunkard show, 7 p.m. California time every Wednesday night on Sirius XMU. Don't forget to rate and review our show, and go ahead and post a message to your social media feed letting everyone know how much you dig the program week after week. We'll be back soon with more transmissions.
Thank you.